You're not healing, you're distracting yourself. The moment everything goes quiet tonight, no phone, no noise, no plans, pay close attention to what you feel, because that single moment will tell you more about your actual healing than the last 6 months of staying busy ever could. Because here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud: distraction and healing can look almost identical from the outside. And if you're not paying close attention to what's actually happening inside you, it's dangerously easy to mistake one for the other. You post more, you work harder, you start new routines, meet new people, fill your schedule from the moment you wake up to the moment your head hits the pillow. And to everyone watching your life from the outside, it looks like progress. It looks like you're winning. It looks like you've moved on. But there's this one moment that tells you everything you need to know about where you actually are emotionally. It's not when you're surrounded by people. It's not when you're busy or laughing or scrolling. It's when everything goes quiet, when there's no notification, no conversation, no task demanding your attention, just silence. And in that silence, how do you feel? Because if the answer is restless, anxious, uncomfortable, or like you immediately need to reach for your phone or find something to do, that's not healing. That's avoidance. And avoidance wearing the costume of productivity is one of the most convincing tricks the mind has ever pulled on itself. So today, we're going to talk about the difference between actually healing and distracting yourself so effectively that it feels like healing. We're going to talk about why distraction can look healthy, why real healing is uncomfortable, and most importantly, what it actually takes to start moving towards something genuine rather than just staying busy enough to forget you're in pain. And I want to be honest with you from the beginning. This conversation might feel a little uncomfortable. You might recognize yourself in some of what we discuss. That's okay. That discomfort you feel, that's not a bad sign. That might actually be the first real sign that something true is breaking through. Let's get into it. One of the most difficult truths to sit with is this: your life can look dramatically better on the surface while you remain completely emotionally unresolved underneath. Think about that for a moment. You can start waking up earlier. You can hit the gym consistently. You can read all the right books, listen to all the right podcasts, start journaling, eat healthier, dress better, show up more confidently at work. You can smile more, laugh more, seem more okay than you've ever seemed. And every single one of those things can be happening simultaneously while you are still completely avoiding the core emotional work that actually needs to happen. Because there's a crucial difference between two things that often get confused, and most people never stop long enough to examine that difference. Distraction gives you relief, healing gives you understanding, and those are absolutely not the same experience. Relief feels good in the moment, it's immediate, it's accessible. You feel something heavy, and then you do something that temporarily lifts that weight. You scroll until the anxiety fades. You text someone until the loneliness quiets. You stay busy until the grief recedes just enough that you can breathe again. Relief works. And because it works, it's incredibly easy to keep reaching for it again and again without ever questioning what you're actually avoiding. Understanding is different. Understanding requires you to look directly at the thing that hurt you and sit with it long enough to actually comprehend what it meant, why it affected you the way it did, what it revealed about your needs and your patterns and your history. Understanding doesn't come fast. It doesn't feel like instant relief. Sometimes it feels more like reopening something than like healing anything, but it's the only path that leads somewhere permanent rather than somewhere temporarily comfortable. And here's what makes this even more complicated. A lot of people equate movement with healing. They think that if their life is moving forward, if they're doing new things, going new places, experiencing new moments, then they must be healing. But moving on and processing pain are not the same journey. You can physically move forward through your life while remaining emotionally parked exactly where you were when the hurt first happened. The geography of your life can change entirely while the unresolved weight inside you stays completely fixed. This is why you'll sometimes see people go through a difficult breakup, immediately throw themselves into a new relationship, seem completely fine for months, and then hit a wall out of nowhere. Not because something new went wrong, but because they never actually processed what the previous experience meant for them. They moved on without moving through. Now, let's talk about how distraction actually shows up in real life. And this is the part that catches most people off guard because distraction doesn't always look like what you imagine it looks like. We tend to picture distraction as obviously unhealthy: endless hours of television, compulsive social media scrolling, numbing yourself with alcohol, sleeping the day away. And yes, those are forms of distraction. But some of the most powerful forms of distraction are things that actually look incredibly healthy and productive from the outside. Take this example. You go through something emotionally difficult, a loss, a betrayal, a relationship ending, something that genuinely shakes the foundation of how you see yourself or your world. And immediately, you dive into self improvement. You discover podcasts about healing, about emotional intelligence, about psychology and trauma and personal growth. You watch video after video. You read book after book. You can articulate your attachment style, your core wounds, your nervous system responses. You can explain emotional regulation to someone else in remarkable detail. But here's the question that matters: are you actually feeling any of it? Or are you intellectualizing your emotions rather than experiencing them? There is a version of consuming healing content that is genuinely helpful and transformative. And there is a version of consuming healing content that becomes its own sophisticated distraction, a way of understanding your pain conceptually without ever having to actually sit inside it and let it move through you. The mind is incredibly clever. It can turn even the language of healing into a tool for avoidance. Another common pattern is jumping into new connections too quickly after something painful. And I want to be careful here because there's nothing wrong with connecting with new people. But be honest with yourself about the why. Are you genuinely drawn to someone new because you created space to be present with them? Or are you reaching for a new connection because being alone with yourself feels unbearable and the presence of another person provides just enough stimulation to quiet the noise inside your own mind? There's a difference between being ready to let someone in and being desperate to not feel lonely. And sometimes what we call moving forward is really just a sophisticated way of saying we don't want to sit with how much we're hurting. The third pattern is the one most people in modern life fall into without even noticing it: keeping the schedule so impossibly full that there is genuinely not a single moment of unstructured quiet. From the alarm going off in the morning to the moment you finally crash at night, there's always something: a meeting, a task, an errand, a conversation, a workout, a show, a phone call, a scroll. Life gets packed so tightly that it becomes genuinely impossible for anything uncomfortable to surface. And that's not an accident. When you're in emotional pain, your nervous system will naturally gravitate toward anything that reduces that pain. Busyness reduces pain. Stimulation reduces pain. Staying occupied reduces pain. So you start packing your life so full that discomfort has nowhere to land. And it works until it doesn't. Until one day the schedule clears unexpectedly, or you find yourself sitting in a quiet room and everything that's been waiting for you in the silence comes rushing in at once. Here's what I want you to understand about that: most people are not actually afraid of healing. They're afraid of what they're going to feel when the distractions finally stop working. That's the real fear underneath the busyness. Not failure, not the future, just the feelings that are already there, waiting. Now, I want to talk about what real healing actually feels like. Because I think there's a widespread misconception that healing should feel peaceful and gentle and progressively more manageable. That if you're doing the right things, each day should feel a little lighter than the last. And sometimes that is what it feels like. But real healing also sometimes feels deeply uncomfortable in ways that can genuinely fool you into thinking you're going backward. Real healing requires confrontation. not with other people necessarily, but with yourself. And that confrontation involves a kind of honesty that is genuinely difficult to maintain. You have to acknowledge what actually hurt you, not the sanitized version, not the narrative where you're completely okay and nothing really got to you, but the real version where something genuinely wounded something inside you. You have to admit what you tolerated, the ways you stayed too long, the ways you accepted less than you deserved, the ways you silenced your own needs to keep peace, the moments where you abandoned your own instincts. And you have to recognize where you abandoned yourself, the times where you shrunk, where you betrayed your own values, where you chose comfort over integrity in ways you're still quietly carrying. That level of self honesty is not easy. It doesn't feel like a peaceful morning meditation. Sometimes it feels raw and messy and like you're dismantling something that has been holding you together, even imperfectly, for a long time. So here's the most honest way I can contrast these two experiences. Distraction numbs, it delays, it avoids, it suppresses, and it's effective at all of these things in the short term. Distraction says, don't think about it. Distraction says, keep moving. Distraction says, stay busy enough, and eventually it won't matter anymore. Healing processes, it understands, it accepts without pretending. It transforms the raw material of what happened to you into something that becomes genuinely integrated into who you are rather than something buried underneath who you're performing yourself to be. Healing doesn't say pretend it didn't hurt. Healing says, let's understand why it affected you as deeply as it did. Let's sit with it long enough that you can carry it without being crushed by it. Let's get to the place where you no longer need to run from the truth of what happened, not because you've forgotten it, but because you've genuinely worked with it. And here's the distinction that I think is one of the most important in this entire conversation. Distraction protects you from pain temporarily. Healing changes you permanently. Temporary protection has its place. In the immediate aftermath of something traumatic or genuinely destabilizing, some distraction is not just understandable, it's actually necessary. You cannot do deep emotional processing 24 hours after something devastating happens. Some amount of buffer, some amount of staying functional is part of surviving acute pain. The problem isn't that you ever distracted yourself. The problem is when distraction becomes the permanent strategy rather than a temporary tool. When temporary protection becomes the default mode, when you've been surviving through avoidance for so long that you genuinely can't remember the last time you let yourself fully feel something, that's when distraction stops being a coping mechanism and starts being a way of life that's costing you something significant. Because here's what that costs you: every experience you don't process doesn't disappear, it accumulates. It builds up inside you like layers of sediment, each one adding slightly more weight, slightly more reactivity, slightly more distance between you and your own emotional interior. You become harder to reach, not just for other people, but for yourself. Your own feelings start feeling foreign. You notice yourself responding to things in ways that don't quite make sense to you, overreacting to small triggers, feeling suddenly hollow in moments that should feel good, unable to fully inhabit your own joy because there's too much unexamined grief underneath it. And this is the part that's most quietly devastating about sustained avoidance. It doesn't just delay the pain, it compounds it, because eventually you're not just dealing with the original thing that hurt you. You're also dealing with the accumulated weight of everything you avoided processing since then, plus the loss of knowing yourself, plus the disconnection from your own emotional experience that comes from years of learning to look away. So if you've been living in that place, if you're starting to recognize yourself in what we've been talking about, let's talk about what it actually looks like to start moving in a different direction. Not a perfect prescription, not a rigid program, but some genuine starting points for doing this differently. The first thing is creating quiet. And I mean that more literally than it might sound. Not every moment of your life needs stimulation. Not every moment needs to be filled with noise or content or conversation or productivity. There is genuine value in creating spaces of unstructured quiet in your daily life. And not because silence is inherently healing, but because clarity, the kind that comes from actually hearing yourself, often only appears when everything else gets still enough for you to listen. This might mean starting your morning without immediately reaching for your phone. It might mean taking a walk without headphones. It might mean sitting with a cup of coffee or tea and genuinely not doing anything else for 15 minutes. It sounds almost absurdly simple. But for someone who has been filling every available moment with stimulation, that kind of quiet can feel surprisingly challenging. And the fact that it feels challenging is information. What is coming up for you in the quiet? What is the silence trying to surface? Those are the things worth paying attention to. The second thing is to stop rushing the process. And this one matters enormously because there is a cultural narrative around healing that frames it as something that should happen efficiently, that should be trackable, that should produce visible results within a reasonable time frame. And that framing does real damage. Healing is not a performance. You do not need to arrive at healed by any particular deadline. You do not need to look healed for the people around you. You do not need to demonstrate your progress. What you actually need is to become more honest with yourself, about what you're carrying and what you're avoiding. That kind of honesty does not follow a schedule. It unfolds at its own pace, and the more you try to rush it, the more you end up performing healing rather than actually experiencing it. Give yourself the permission to not be further along than you are. Give yourself permission to still be working through something that happened a long time ago. You are not behind. You are exactly where you are. And the only way forward is through, at whatever pace is actually honest for you. The third starting point is learning to feel without immediately escaping. This is probably the most practically difficult one because it requires interrupting a pattern that your nervous system has likely been reinforcing for a long time. When something uncomfortable comes up, an emotion, a memory, a wave of grief or anger or longing, the habitual response for someone who has been living in avoidance mode is to immediately reach for something that makes it stop. Scroll, text, work, eat, distract, do anything other than actually sit inside what's happening. What healing asks of you instead is to stay, just for a moment, just long enough to notice what's actually happening inside you without immediately running from it. Not to wallow, not to indulge in suffering, but to actually let the emotion complete its natural movement rather than interrupting it before it has the chance to tell you anything. Emotions are not your enemies, they are information. They are trying to communicate something about your experience, your needs, your history, your values. When you cut them off before they can complete their message, you don't eliminate the information, you just bury it. It stays there and it waits. The fourth thing is to change the questions you ask yourself when emotions arise. This is subtle, but genuinely powerful. Most of us, when we're feeling something difficult, ask questions oriented towards stopping the feeling. How do I make this go away? How do I feel better? How do I get past this as quickly as possible? And while those questions are completely human, they're also oriented entirely toward avoidance. They're asking for the exit, not for understanding. Try shifting to questions that are oriented toward curiosity instead. Not how do I stop feeling this, but what is this feeling trying to show me? Not how do I get over this faster, but what does the intensity of this tell me about what mattered to me? Not how do I avoid this happening again, but what does this experience reveal about a pattern I might have been carrying for longer than just this situation? These kinds of questions don't give you immediate relief, but they give you something more valuable than immediate relief. They give you access to yourself. They give you information that you can actually work with rather than information you suppress until it surfaces sideways somewhere unexpected. And here's something I want to offer as we move toward the end of this conversation. I think a lot of people enter the idea of healing with a specific image of what it looks like on the other side. They imagine becoming unaffected, becoming unbothered, getting to a place where the things that hurt them simply don't carry weight anymore. And while some things do genuinely become lighter with time and work, the actual destination of healing isn't becoming emotionally immune. Real healing makes you more connected to yourself, not less connected to your emotions. It doesn't produce someone who is no longer capable of being moved. It produces someone who can be moved without being swept away, someone who can feel grief without drowning in it, someone who can feel anger without being consumed by it, someone who can sit inside difficult emotions without needing to immediately escape them because they've learned that they can survive the feeling, that the feeling is not going to destroy them. That capacity, the ability to be with your own emotional experience without panicking and running, that is one of the most genuinely transformative things that real healing can give you. And it is the direct opposite of what sustained distraction builds. Distraction teaches your nervous system that feelings are dangerous and must be avoided. Healing teaches your nervous system that feelings are survivable and worth listening to. If you've been in distraction mode for a long time, this shift doesn't happen overnight. Your nervous system has learned a very specific set of habits, and those habits served a genuine protective function. You don't need to be harsh with yourself for having developed them, but you do need to gently, consistently begin teaching yourself a different response. And maybe the most important reframe I can offer you before we close is this one. You might be sitting with this content feeling like you're behind, like everyone else figured this out already, and you've just been running in circles. Like the fact that you're still dealing with something that happened a year ago, or 3 years ago, or 10 years ago means something is fundamentally wrong with you. Nothing is fundamentally wrong with you. You've been surviving. You developed strategies that helped you function when functioning was all you could manage. The distraction wasn't a moral failure, it was a human response to pain that felt too large to face directly. Recognizing that it hasn't actually been healing is not a reason to judge yourself. It's the beginning of doing something different. Stillness might feel unfamiliar right now. Sitting with your own emotions without reaching for an exit might feel genuinely foreign. That's okay. Most things that are worth building feel foreign at the beginning. The familiarity comes with practice, the comfort comes with time, and the healing, the real kind, the kind that actually changes something permanent in how you experience yourself and your life, that begins the moment you stop running from what's inside you. Because here's the truth that none of the distractions in the world can change. Everything you've been avoiding emotionally is still there. It's been waiting for you. It has nowhere else to go, and it will keep waiting in every quiet moment, in every pause between the noise, until you finally turn toward it instead of away. That turning doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to happen all at once. It just has to begin. And maybe for you, right now, this conversation is part of that beginning. If something in this video landed for you, if something felt true in a way that was uncomfortable or clarifying or both, sit with that. Don't immediately scroll to the next thing. Let it settle. Let it mean something, because that right there, that willingness to stay with something real instead of immediately moving on, that's not nothing. That might actually be the start of something genuinely different. Take care of yourself. Stay blessed. God bless you always. Inner Echoes Collective.